1966. Brooklyn, New York. A teenage kid watches Jimi Hendrix on TV. Performing. Exploding. Guitar on fire. Music nobody's ever heard before. The kid starts jumping up and down. I have to meet that guy. I have to meet him. His mother watches, confused. Velvert, calm down. You don't even know him. I don't care. I'm gonna find him. This is Velvert Turner. 15 years old. Nobody. Unknown guitarist from Brooklyn. But he's about to do something crazy. Something impossible. He's going to seek out Jimi Hendrix. Track him down. Ask him for guitar lessons. And somehow, incredibly, Jimmy's going to say yes. This is the story of the teenager Jimi Hendrix taught to play guitar. The kid who got private lessons from the greatest guitarist in the world. And the mentorship that nobody believed really happened. But first, you need to understand how insane this was. 1966. Jimi Hendrix is exploding onto the scene. Hey Joe climbing the charts. The Jimi Hendrix experience forming. Every musician in the world watching. He's busy. He's famous. He's surrounded by managers, producers, record executives. Why would he take time to teach some random kid from Brooklyn? He wouldn't. It makes no sense, unless you understand who Jimi really was. Velvert Turner. Born October 12, 1951. Brooklyn kid. Obsessed with guitar, not rich, not connected. No music industry contacts. Just passion. He sees Jimi on TV. Probably early 1966. Maybe late 1965. The exact date is lost to history, but the moment is documented. Velvert's mother, Helen Harris, told the story years later. Velvert standing in front of the television, watching Jimi perform, jumping up and down, shouting, I have to meet that guy. Not, I wish I could meet him. Not, wouldn't that be cool? I have to. That's determination. That's obsession. Velvert seeks Jimi out. How? We don't know the exact details, but somehow, this Brooklyn teenager tracks down the most talked about guitarist in New York, and Jimi, incredibly, takes him under his wing. 302 West 12th Street. Greenwich Village. Jimi's apartment, not the famous 59 West 12th Street apartment he'll move into in 1969. That comes later. This is 1966 to 67. Early days. Jimi's still hustling, still building his empire, but he makes time for this kid. This unknown teenager from Brooklyn. Velvert Turner becomes Jimi's student. His protege. His little brother, Richard Lloyd. Future guitarist for television. One of the most influential punk/new wave bands of the 1970s. Television's debut album, Marquee Moon, 1977, is considered one of the greatest guitar albums ever made. Rolling Stone Top 500. Critics' darling. Influence on indie rock immeasurable. But as a teenager in late 1960s New York, Richard Lloyd was nobody. Just a kid who loved guitar. And he was Velvert Turner's best friend. Richard witnessed everything. The lessons. The phone calls. The visits to 302 West 12th Street. Years later, decades later, Richard told the story. Multiple detailed interviews. Guitar World Magazine. Guitar Player Magazine. NUVO Magazine. The Pitch KC. Multiple sources spanning 15+ years. The story never changed. Every detail consistent. Every fact aligned. Different journalists. Different years. Different contexts. But the core narrative remained identical. Jimi taught Velvert. Velvert taught Richard. The mirror. The code name. The techniques. This is how we know it's true. Fabricated stories change over time. Details slip. Contradictions emerged. Richard's story? Rock solid. Unchanging. Documented. One specific incident proves the connection beyond doubt. Richard Lloyd, interviewed by Guitar World. He went into the other room and dialed a number. It rang, and he asked for a name other than Jimi's. Context. Richard's friends challenged Velvert. You know Jimi? Prove it. Velvert said. He's in New York because he has a show later. I could call him at his hotel. Friends mocking. Yeah, right. Do it then. Velvert goes to another room. Dials a number. Asks for someone who isn't Jimi Hendrix. Friends watching. You didn't ask for Hendrix. Who's this other guy? Velvert. Jimi doesn't register under his own name. Smart. Famous musicians use aliases at hotels. Privacy. Security. Avoiding fans. The phone gets passed around. Everyone talking. Testing. Skeptical. Finally handed to Richard. Richard Lloyd. While I was on the phone, Jimi picked up and said, Hey man, who is this? I said, It's Velvert, Jimi. and handed the phone back. Richard heard Jimmy's voice. Directly. On the phone. This wasn't hearsay. This wasn't rumor. Richard Lloyd, future rock legend, personally verified that Velvert knew Jimi. The connection was real. Richard Lloyd, Guitar World interview. We became best friends, and he used to take guitar lessons from Jimi on 12th Street in his apartment. They used a giant mirror, because Jimmy's left-handed and Velvert's right-handed. Stop. Think about that. A giant mirror. Why? Jimi played left-handed. Flipped guitar. Strings reversed. Velvert played right-handed. Normal orientation. If Jimi demonstrated a chord or technique, Velvert couldn't just copy him directly. Everything was backwards. Solution. Giant mirror. Jimi plays. Velvert watches in the mirror. The reflection reverses Jimmy's left-handed playing into right-handed orientation. Brilliant. Simple. Effective. But here's what makes this story even better. Velvert asked Jimi for permission to share the lessons. Jimi, can I show my friend Richard what you're teaching me? Jimi, fine, man, that's your best friend. Go ahead and tell him. Show him. So Velvert would leave Jimmy's apartment, walk 6 blocks, go to Richard Lloyd's house, and teach Richard everything Jimi just taught him. Richard Lloyd. Velvert used to leave Jimmy's house and come over to my house, and we would practice together. This means Richard Lloyd, television guitarist, punk rock legend, is technically Jimmy's student once removed. Jimi taught Velvert. Velvert taught Richard. The lineage continues. What did Jimi teach? Richard Lloyd documented it. Multiple interviews. Things like double stops, bends, octaves, and little things that I picked up on because I have a photographic memory. Double stops, playing 2 strings simultaneously, creating harmony. Bends, pushing strings to change pitch, adding emotion. Octaves, playing the same note at different registers, creating depth. These weren't random techniques. These were the foundation of Jimmy's sound. Richard, I couldn't play them for a couple of years, but because of my memory, I had them locked up in there. He memorized the techniques, stored them, practiced for years, eventually mastered them. That's how teaching works. Plant seeds. They grow over time. But Jimi taught more than technique, that he taught philosophy, approach, mindset, the architecture of music. The most important lesson, documented in multiple sources, became Velvert's foundation. Learn chords first. Jimmy's exact words to Velvert Turner. Forget about playing lead in the beginning. The main thing I want you to learn are chords. Everyone puts so much emphasis on lead guitar, but chords are more important. Stop. Think about how radical this is. 1966-67. Guitar Hero era beginning. Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page. All about solos. All about flash. Every kid wants to play lead. Wants to shred. Wants to be the star. But Jimi, the greatest lead guitarist in the world, tells his student, learn chords first. Why? Jimi explained the logic. If you learn chords first, you can easily paint them with lead notes. This is brilliant pedagogy. This is understanding music at architectural level. Chords create the structure, the foundation, the landscape, the harmonic framework. Lead guitar? That's decoration. Color, texture, flourish. You can't paint a house that hasn't been built. Can't decorate a room that doesn't exist. Chords first, foundation first, structure first. Then, you add the solos, the bends, the flashy stuff. Most guitarists learn backwards. Solo first, flashy first, ego first, then they struggle with rhythm, with chord changes, with musical structure. Jimi taught the opposite. Master the foundation. The rest becomes easy. This wasn't just guitar advice. This was life philosophy. Build your foundation first. Master the basics. Then innovate. Velvert absorbed this. Richard Lloyd absorbed this through Velvert, and it shaped their entire approach to music. Think about Jimi's own journey that he taught himself guitar. Listened to Muddy Waters records. Chuck Berry. Blues masters. They played chords. Rhythm. Foundation. Jimi mastered that first. Then added his innovations. His feedback. His revolutionary techniques. He built on solid foundation. That's why his innovation worked when teaching Velvert. He shared that wisdom. That path. Don't try to run before you can walk. Don't try to paint before you build the canvas. Chords first. Always chords first. The code name. Jamie Nevertz. Velvert and Richard were teenagers. Hanging out with the most famous guitarist in the world. Friends wanted to tag along. Where you going? Can I come? Velvert and Richard needed privacy. Needed to keep the lessons secret. Solution, code name. When they talked about visiting Jimi, they said Jamie Neverts. Neverts is Stephen backwards, likely referencing Steve Paul's Scene Club where Jimi played. Jamie close to Jimi, but different enough to throw people off. Richard Lloyd, 2009. The code name the two teens used to keep friends from tagging along when they went to see the guitar master. In 2009, Richard produced a tribute album called The Jamie Neverts Story in memory of both Velvert and Jimi. The code name became legend. How do we know this story is true? Some people doubt it. Velvert claimed to be Jimi's student. No photos, no recordings. Just his word. But the evidence is overwhelming. 1. Richard Lloyd testimony. Consistent across 15-plus years of interviews. Never changed details. Point 2. Velvert's mother Helen Harris confirmed the TV jumping story. Point 3. Velvert produced an official Jimi Hendrix tutorial video in the mid-1980s with the Hendrix family's approval. They wouldn't give permission to a fraud. Point 4. Velvert's playing style, identical to late-period Jimi. Guitar behind back. Playing with teeth. Even vocals sounded like Jimi. Point 5. His 1972 album, Velvert Turner Group, sounds so much like Jimi that people thought it was a lost Hendrix recording. Point 6. Richard Lloyd witnessed phone calls between Jimi and Velvert. Heard them talking. Point 7. The giant mirror detail. Too specific to be invented. The Hendrix family believed Velvert. Richard Lloyd believed him. The evidence supports it happened, but here's the beautiful part of this story. Jimi didn't have to do this, he was busy. Famous. Building his career. Recording. Are you experienced? Playing shows across England and America, he could have ignored Velvert. Brushed him off. Said, sorry kid, too busy. But he didn't. He saw a teenager with passion. With determination. With that same hunger Jimi had at 15. And he remembered being that kid. Broke. Unknown. Desperate to learn. Remembered the people who helped him. Billy Davis showing him stage tricks in Seattle. Friends teaching him chords. Musicians letting him sit in. Jimi paid it forward. Took this Brooklyn kid under his wing. Taught him. Mentored him. Treated him like a little brother. Richard Lloyd. I owe a lot to Hendrix, and I always hid that influence. I once told Tom Verlaine that I knew Jimi Hendrix, and he laughed at me. Nobody would believe it. Tom Verlaine, co-founder of television. Richard's bandmate. Richard told him about the Jimi connection. Tom laughed. Thought he was lying. So Richard stopped talking about it. Why tell people if they won't believe you? But it was real. It happened. In television, I never played like Jimi's style, but I knew it. My goal in doing the album is to pay a debt to Jimi and to Velvert because they were both friends of mine. That's legacy, not just what you play, what you pass on. Velvert Turner's life after Jimi. September 18, 1970, Jimi dies. Velvert is 18 years old. Devastated that he forms the Velvert Turner Group. Tries to establish his own career. 1972, debut album. Self-titled. Phillips label. Every track original except one. Cover of Jimi's Freedom. Tribute to his mentor. The album sounds so much like Jimi that collectors debate if it's a lost Hendrix recording. Velvert even looked like Jimi. Afro. Colorful clothing. Played behind his back. Played with his teeth. Some criticized him. He's just copying Jimi. But what else could he do? Jimi was his teacher. His mentor. His hero. Of course the influence shows. That's how mentorship works. Mid-1980s. Velvert narrates official Jimi Hendrix instructional video. Learn to play the songs from Are You Experienced? Andy Alador demonstrates the techniques. Velvert explains them. The Hendrix family approved it. Official product. This is proof. If Velvert was a fraud, the family wouldn't have given permission. Later life. Velvert worked at Samaritan Village in Brooklyn, helping people struggling with substance abuse, using his experience, his pain, his connection to Jimi, who also struggled, to help others. December 11, 2000. Velvert Turner dies at age 49. Brooklyn, New York. Too young. Like his mentor. 2004. Velvert featured on Power of Soul, a tribute to Jimi Hendrix album. 43-second guitar solo titled Going Home. 2009. Richard Lloyd releases The Jamie Neverts Story. Tribute album to both Velvert and Jimi. The code name becomes memorial. The friendship immortalized. Think about what Jimmy did. A teenage kid saw him on TV, jumped up and down, decided to track him down. Jimmy could have said no, could have been too busy, too important. Instead, he opened his door, set up a giant mirror, taught the kid everything he knew. Chords first, then lead. Paint the landscape before adding flourishes. Not for money, not for publicity. Just because a kid had passion, Velvert Turner's life was changed. Richard Lloyd's life was changed. Television's sound was influenced. The ripples continue. Students teaching students. Knowledge spreading. That's legacy. Jimi Hendrix, street musician who became the greatest guitarist of all time. But he never forgot being the kid who needed help, who needed mentorship, who needed someone to believe in him. So when Velvert Turner showed up, this unknown Brooklyn teenager with nothing but determination, Jimmy saw himself, and he helped point 302 West 12th Street, Greenwich Village, 1966-67. A giant mirror in the apartment. Jimmy playing left-handed, Velvert watching the reflection, learning, growing. Richard Lloyd 6 blocks away, waiting for Velvert to come teach him what Jimmy just taught. A chain of knowledge, a lineage of sound. One teenager changed by generosity. That teenager changes another, who changes thousands. That's how music evolves. Not just through albums, through people, through teaching, through kindness. Velvert Turner, the teenager Jimi Hendrix taught to play guitar. Nobody believed his story. People thought he was lying, making it up for attention, but it was true. Every word, the giant mirror, the code name, the lessons, the friendship, documented, witnessed, verified. Jimi Hendrix took time from his meteoric rise to teach a kid who asked. That's character. That's humanity. That's legacy. 1966. A kid watching TV, jumping up and down. I have to meet him. He did. And Jimmy said yes. That's who Jimi Hendrix was.